So what's up, guys? So today we're going to talk about JVP. And JVP really had a mask-off moment. And it's funny because this mask-off moment, although there have been many mask-off moments from their national organization, this came from a local chapter in San Diego, right? So this was a JVP post. And I responded by saying, because, I like to regulate the comments on Blue Sky, right? I'm kind of like the Warren G of Blue Sky regulators, right? I like to regulate the comments, if you will, on Blue Sky. And so I said, you guys are Zionist operatives. They responded by saying that they're a local group of San Diego activists. They said they claim to be explicitly anti-Zionist and work with the local Palestinian youth movement and other Muslim partners. And an example of this is the multiple teach-ins they've hosted. Again, the Palestinian youth movement has sold out to Zionist organizations such as JVP, and if not now, that's another video for another time. We're going to focus on one thing at a time, and that's a part of the greater Zionist normalization and subversion of the Palestine movement here in North America, right? But we're going to focus on this specific topic of JVP Zionist normalization. So I responded, game's up, posting a list of grantees from the Foundation for Middle East Peace. And you know whose name is on that list? JVP. And actually, I have it pulled up right here. So, 2019 grantees from the Zionist Foundation for Middle East Peace. And notice how they have a straight off the bat Zionist view of Palestine. They don't mention Occupy 1948 Palestine, where the Palestinian branch of my family happens to be from, right? So here's the organizations that they're supporting as of 2019. So 972 Zionist organization, Adullah Zionist normalizer, Adva Zionist, Akivot Zionist, Al-Shabaka Zionist normalizers, Alliance for Middle East Peace Zionist, Americans for Peace Now Zionist, Association for Civil Rights in Occupy 1948 Palestine Zionist, B'Tselem is Zionist, BIMCOM is Zionist, Breaking the Silence is Zionist, Churches for Middle East Peace is Zionist normalization, Defense for Children International Palestine, again, that's an NGO, and they're involved with Zionist normalization. The Democratic Bloc is Zionist, Gisha is Zionist, the Heartland Initiative is Zionist, If Not Now is Zionist, Iramim is Zionist, J Street Education Fund is Zionist, JVP is Zionist, Just Vision and Local Caller is Zionist, Kerem Navot is Zionist, the Middle East Institute is Zionist, the Movement for Freedom of Information in Occupied 1948 Palestine, also Zionist, the New Zionist Fund, Truah, Who Profits, Yesh Din, they're all involved with Zionist normalization. So it's not far-fetched. And again, notice how they took their grantees off the list, off their website for 2025? Because people are seeing through them, right? And let's talk about who their founder is. Merle Thorpe. Merle Thorpe was a Zionist, okay? Merle Thorpe was a liberal Zionist. He was involved with Peace Now, right? So let's continue. And then they claim again to be a local chapter comprised of Jews, Muslims, Christians, and atheists that partner with San Diego anti-Zionist organizations and events. They claim to be funded by local leadership. We know they're really not. Zionists like the ADL, again, JVP is Zionist, go to combat them at local city halls when they advocate for anti-Zionist policies. And I said, you're still tied to the national organization, and that undermines your credibility. And I bring up this situation of the Yusuf Munayyer situation, where Munayyer normalized Jewish currents and got praised by JVP. This is from the Good Shepherd Collective. Dude, you don't know how many screenshots I have of JVP. I got hella screenshots of JVP, okay? So liberal discourse in service of the ruling class deploys its many machinations to describe the terms of the world around us, but most importantly defines justice for the oppressed and besieged. In service of Zionism, Yusuf Munayyer posits an ethic where the colonizers keep their spoils. Yeah, so by collaborating with JVP and Jewish Currents, Yusuf Munayyer is a Zionist normalizer. And that's just the same post. So, and then in this post, this is another big, for those that aren't aware, JVP is a Zionist organization. So in this post, JVP not only parrots Zionist propaganda, but also makes false claims about Hamas, a claim which we now know is entirely false, and which many identified as such on October 7th, right? So, again, JVP is mourning Zionist settlers who are settling and stealing Palestinian land and who are stealing Palestinian resources, right? So, again, JVP is Zionist. And then look, JVP is condemning the Palestinian resistance. So JVP is a Zionist organization. Again, this is from Good Shepherd Collective. I have the thread reader up and we're going to go through that. So, and I say you're still tied to the national organization and that undermines your credibility. And so here's the mask off moment. National made, according to JVP San Diego, and I believe they're lying. I have reason to believe they're lying. We're going to go through to see who they're following. National made politically minded comments after October 7th that ended up not being effective in swaying liberals. Politically minded comments. Really? Politically minded comments? So, again, JVP, the same organization that's funded by, as you'll see in a second, the Baffer Young Fund, the Tides Foundation, the Foundation for Middle East Peace, and the Rockefeller Foundation, made politically minded comments that were not effective in swaying liberals. Again, this is the San Diego chapter running cover for national JVP. JVP is Zionist. The San Diego chapter of JVP is Zionist. The Seattle chapter of JVP is Zionist. The Bay Area chapter of JVP is Zionist. Actually, in fact, the Seattle chapter is run by one of the biggest Zionist operatives here on the West Coast, Alice Rothschild, right? So you know that the JVP chapter in Seattle is liberal Zionist, right? As more information came out about the Hannibal Directive, JVP, dude, don't even call yourself anti-Zionist. And I should have pushed back on them here more. JVP stopped including those figures in their statements. Well, JVP made the statements in the first place. JVP literally fundraises for Jamal Bowman and Zohran Mandami. And so they try to run cover. And so this is what I say. I tell them, you're a liberal Zionist grifter. We know who pays you, Pinocchio. You don't fool anybody. I said that to them. So who is JVP following? From the periphery, we've discussed that show here on this channel. They have a pattern of Zionist normalization. Matt Lieb, who is a Zionist, Sam Cedar, who is a Zionist, Emma Vigeland, who's a Zionist, Matt Legg, who's a Zionist, Dave Weigel, who is a Zionist, Jewish Currents, Zionist propaganda, Rebecca Azor, possibly a Zionist grifter, Ben Burgess, definitely a Zionist propagandist, the Vanguard, who's liberal Zionist, the Majority Report is Zionist, Francesca Fiorentini is Zionist, allegedly a Chinese government operative, right? Crystal Ball, Zionist neocon, Matt Binder, Zionist, Abby Martin is a Zionist normalizer, right? Kolinsky's a Zionist. Prem Thakur is a liberal Zionist. He literally works for Mehdi Hassan. The BNC has a pattern of Zionist normalization, which we'll get into in a future video. Nina Turner's a liberal Zionist. The Sunrise Movement's a liberal Zionist. Stephanie Fox, the director of JVP, is a Zionist. Beth Miller is a Zionist, right? Linda Sarsour is a Zionist normalizer. Naomi Klein is a Zionist. The film Israelism, that's Zionist propaganda, funded by a literal Zionist film outlet. IJV is Zionist. Rabbis for Ceasefire is liberal Zionist. You know, the International Jewish Anti-Zionist Network, let's check who they're following. Yair Cohen. Right? They're literally following a Zionist. Eitan Efrod. This guy's a Zionist settler. They're following literal Zionist settlers. Corey Bush is a Zionist. Linda Sarsour is a Zionist normalizer. The Institute for Critical Studies of Zionism, they employ literal JVP operatives. Right? So Charles Keener, we've outed him as a liberal Zionist. The Institute for Middle East Understanding, that's a Zionist think tank. Center for Jewish Nonviolence, that's a Zionist institution. 972 Magazine, that's Zionist. Jacobin is literally funded by the New York Jewish Communal Fund and is Zionist. ZDO, a new media organization from Mehdi Hassan, that's Zionist. Jews Against Fascism, that's liberal Zionist. If Not Now is Zionist. Joy-Ann Reid's a liberal Zionist. Corey Bush is a liberal Zionist. Al Jazeera has a pattern of Zionist normalization vis-a-vis Yoav Litvin. Ayanna Pressley's a Zionist. Independent Jewish Voice is a Zionist. Haaretz is literally Zionist and a settler propaganda outlet. Can't even call it a publication. Jamal Bowman's a Zionist. Francesca Fiorentini is a Zionist. And possibly a Chinese government operative. Ilhan Omar is a Zionist. David Sirota literally worked for AIPAC and is a Zionist. Glenn Klippenstein is probably a liberal Zionist. Mehdi Hassan is a Zionist normalizer. AOC is a Zionist. The Middle East Eye has a pattern of Zionist normalization as well. JVP Seattle, again, liberal Zionist. Code Pink, liberal Zionist. And they're also Chinese government operatives, right? JVP is Zionist. So JVP San Diego has a pattern of liberal Zionist organization. Okay? And they're no different from their national chapter. And so when I called them on it, again, I'm Palestinian and Lebanese. Like, genetics don't lie, right? I'm Palestinian and Lebanese, right? So when someone like me calls them out on it, they try to obfuscate. They try to run cover. So here we go. This is from Good Shepherd Collective. Just wild timing. If JVP chapters are different from national as people argue, they'll prioritize Palestinian liberation by adopting an anti-Zionism that is decolonial. At a minimum, local chapters should stop their material support, social support by halting donations and rebrand. And here you go. In New York, JVP is running cover for Jamal Bowman and campaigning for Jamal Bowman. This is from 11th of July, 2024. And then this is from Nerdin Kiswani, right? And she says, I'm sorry, but if JVP, If Not Now, and JFREJ want more praise than Neturei Karta, and by the way, I oppose the Neturei Karta because they have a settler branch. They have a branch that is literally Zionist settlers. So if any organization that literally includes Zionist settlers is inherently Zionist, right? So, and want to be seen as truly progressive anti-Zionist orgs, they need to start acting like it. That means actually embodying anti-Zionism, not just condemning resistance, but openly supporting it. They should be more vocal in championing Palestinian resistance than we are. No one's more vocal than, there are not many people in the States that are more vocal than me in championing Palestinian resistance. Instead, they let us put ourselves in the line over and over while they play it safe and appease their liberal Zionist base. So here's a little history of JVP. You can see that JVP was founded in '96 by Julia Kaplan and Rachel Eisner and Julie Inney in Berkeley, who were students. They were students at Cal, right? Ironically, my mom's alma mater for grad school. And what is normalization? So normalization is any sort of Zionist normalizing language or actions, right? So using normalizing language, such as is detailed here in this document, providing a platform to or collaborating with Zionist or Zionist-run orgs, accepting funding from institutions that fund Zionist institutions, and working and volunteering with organizations and people that do any of the above, right? So, and here's a timeline of JVP's policies and language deconstruction. So, 2001, you have a clear instance of Zionist normalization right here. So when they talk about conflict, when they talk about freedom and right to self-representation, so they're evading from using the correct terminology, such as colonization, ethnic cleansing, settler colonialism, genocide, and apartheid, and oversimplifying, diminishing the reality of the Zionist entity's racial extermination of Palestinians into a conflict, right? And then it'll show who's funding them too, right? This website setup is set up kind of wonky, so we'll just try to work with what we got here. But it's a good document that exposes the Zionist normalization of JVP. So the Tides Foundation, who by the way funds the Native Movement and the NDN Collective, they have a revenue of $511 million, $78,682, and assets worth $531,362,799. This is as of 2019. It's probably more. So Tides Foundation made grants of varying amounts to normalizing entities, some of which are the Sierra Club, Amnesty International, Code Pink, If Not Now, and J Street. And the Tides Foundation has previously funded the New Zionist Fund and the Zionist Policy Forum, right? And then you got the Bafra-Youngs. So the Bafra-Youngs, so Bafra-Young is, they fund the Morningstar Foundation, which funds Aboda, the New Zionist Fund, Sierra Club Foundation. And then its donor organizations are If Not Now, the NDN Collective, Tide Center, and JVP. And then you got the New York Jewish Communal Fund, which funds Jacobin Magazine, right? And also funds JVP. The Schwab Charitable Fund, which has a revenue as of 2017, $3,147,045,622, and assets totaling $10,634,353,155, and that's as of 2021. And they grant about $4,400,000,000. And they're funding the ADL, they're funding the New Zionist Fund, and they're funding the JVP. So, and here's a little thing about normalization. So normalization is a long-running Zionist strategy that is used side by side with feigned alliance with the Palestinian cause. The alliance is generally a front to dupe and convince the masses, usually Palestinians as well, but not limited to others as well, that the organization advocates for Palestinian liberation. However, its true intentions and actions are entirely in favor of the continued colonization of Palestine. Such organizations are, in all actuality, an extension of the Zionist regime equally as deadly and cancerous to Palestinians and their liberation. So here, even starting in 2001, right, JVP used language of Zionist normalization, talking about conflicts, grants freedom and the right to self-representation, right? And so that what they're doing here is evading from using the correct terminology such as colonization, ethnic cleansing, genocide, and apartheid, and settler colonialism, and oversimplifying and diminishing the reality of the Zionist entity's racial extermination of Palestinians to a conflict, right? So that's what they're doing right there. So where's the next timeline of this? Oh, and here they go. So in 2007, they talk about the aspirations of settlers and Palestinians for security and self-determination. So that's another example of normalizing two-state solution wording that implies colonial settlers and indigenous Palestinians are somehow at the same social level where both aspire for security and self-determination. The colonizer that receives billions of U.S. taxpayer money to fund its military weaponry, Iron Dome system, and replenish its advanced war technology, armory has aspirations for quote-unquote security and quote-unquote self-determination. So then they don't mention, notice how they leave out here, occupied 1948 Palestine, right? That's the big elephant in the room right here. So they talk about the West Bank, Gaza, and Qudus, but they don't talk about occupied 1940 Palestine. So a clear attempt not only to fragment the Palestinian state, but also minimize the Zionist entity's occupation of Palestine to only those three areas. And then they talk about international law and equity. So that's ambiguous and dismissive and avoids stating the correct and necessary right of return to indigenous Palestinians to their motherland. Refugee problem is a disrespectful and cowardly terminology when referring to thousands of indigenous Palestinians who have fled their homeland to avoid being butchered by the same Zionist settlers JVP claimed to aspire security and self-determination for. And then you see 2013, when they talk about Quds being shared in a manner that reflects spiritual, economic, and political importance to both settlers and Palestinians. So a city that has belonged to thousands of years to indigenous Palestinians has no reason to be shared with any settlers, no matter their nationality. It says American and European, but you could extend that to Iranian settlers, Iranian Jews. You could extend that to Iraqi Jews. You could extend that to Kurdish Jews, Ethiopian Jews, Yemeni Jews, because they're all settlers, right? So a city that has thousands of years belong to indigenous Palestinians has no right to be shared with any settlers who violate, destroy, and desecrate it on a daily basis. Qudus will not be divided, right? And then they talk about peace activists. Settlers ethnically cleansing and displacing Palestinians will never hold the title of peace activists along their colonial identity. There is no peace in colonization, right? So here we go. And then they talk about supporting any solution that is consistent with the full rights of both Palestinians and Zionist settlers. So whether it's binational state, two states, or some other solution. So offhand and ambiguous and undefined, just like all of JVP's policies, there is no clear indication of what exactly the organization advocates for, but it is clear that their loyalties where does this continue? Well, it's clear that their loyalties are to Zionist settlers, right? Let me see. See, this page is unabashed. Okay, their loyalties is unabashedly reductionist and provides cover for the Zionist entity to continue their relentless war crime rampage so the world turns a blind eye to it. The second underlined phrase indicates a desire towards the Zionist entity being the reigning power that holds the authority of whether or not to bestow rights on Palestinians, as if the indigenous people require the colonizing entity to give them rights. The rights of Zionist settlers and Palestinians. That's another big red flag, right? to self-representation and collective sovereignty. So there is no such thing as Zionist settler rights. Simply settlers with pre-existing nationalities of where they came from. JVP's use of language is crystal clear, and admittance of endorsements of the existence of the Zionist settlers and settlers that identify Zionist settlers, right? Collective sovereignty is blatant advocacy for a two-state solution that calls for both settlers and Palestinians to collectively reside together. The colonizer and colonized will never coexist. Right? So, and then here you go. And then if you want to dig into their staff members, and then when they talk about it's up to settlers and Palestinians to reach a mutually agreed upon solution, that's another big red flag, because of the belief that the colonizer and the colonized may reach a mutual agreement is not only highly uneducated and comically horrifying, but to equate the identity of the oppressed and the oppressor is yet another display of normalization and denial of the Palestinian blood on every single settler's hands. And then when they talk about just and comprehensive peace, and the acknowledgement of the Nakba, so peace between settlers and Palestinians is impossible as reversing the last 74 years of settler colonialism, massacre, and genocide. Acknowledging the Nakba is hardly a determining factor of a so-called peace when in light of the very public documented racist genocidal marches in May 2021 and May 2022, where Zionist settlers roamed the streets of Qudus calling for a second Nakba and faced no consequences whatsoever. It is clear that the Zionist entity acknowledges the Nakba and continues it every day, and it is both ignorant and beyond foolish. It's actually counterinsurgent for JVP to have this as one of their alleged mission statements. And JVP, since its early years, has never held a single stance or enforced one policy that could ever advocate for Palestinians' rights, liberation, empowerment, or decolonization from the Zionist entity. Oh, and Penny Rosenwasser, who's friends with Mitchell Plitnick, is a founding board member of JVP. So there's more evidence, right? And then you got Lev. So these are the people that were involved in the founding and the hierarchy of JVP. So Isaac Lev Shmonko, he's another one of the many JVP board directors who relish in their collaboration and normalization with Zionist-backed and funded organizations. Isaac, in particular, has worked with donor organizations as well as enterprises falling in that category. He has worked with the Resource Generation, an organization that is funded by the Bafra Young Foundation, which funds If Not Now, and closely works with JVP, and the Tides Foundation, which funds J Street. Isaac represents a position of authority within the Bafra Young Foundation, and he signed a signatory on his behalf in 2020. His co-worker at the Gelman Giving, Rachel Gelman, also chairs this foundation. Bafra Young Foundation also happens to be funded by the Morningstar Foundation, which provides grants to Zionist settler organizations. It must be made clear that there is no such thing as a left-wing Zionist settler. That is simply another distraction to deter the public eye from paying attention to the criminal identity of each Zionist settler and the whole settler colonial entity that likes to call itself that. Because I'm not even going to normalize the name. Because if these settlers aren't being deployed to the military, they are bearing weapons to assault and brutalize Palestinians, and if not that, they are squatting in a Palestinian's home and aiding the settler colonial occupation regime as it continues its cycle of genocide, settler colonialism, and apartheid on indigenous people. Right, and did I mention the Rockefellers already? So yeah, the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, that they also fund the JVP, as of 2015, and as of 2015 had a revenue of $14,599,553, and assets worth $859,466,256. And in 2019, it distributed $38,700,000 in grants, in almost 350 grants, and these grants went to JVP and ADL, If Not Now, J Street, Just Vision, and the Sierra Club. So again, JVP is clearly Zionist. And then you got Leonard. So, and I should have read this. Again, this is set up kind of wonky, but it's an effective document and a really educational document. So below is only a handful of JVP staff and current and former whose connections and links with Zionist organizations prior, during, and after their employment with JVP are a clear indication of what the organization stands for. And then you got one of their founders, Rachel Eisner, one of the founding members of JVP. Rachel is based in Berkeley, where she currently works as a director of development and communication with Civicor. Her professional portfolio lists her as a BA of multi-interdisciplinary studies from Cal, where she was fairly active in the Progressive Zionist Caucus. She co-founded JVP in 1996 and immediately, with no time to lose, was hired as an associate regional director for the New Zionist Fund in 1997, where she worked for over 4 years. And the NIF is a U.S.-based nonprofit, lists its own objectives as aiming to strengthen Zionist democracy and attain equality and justice for Zionist settlers, while routinely allocating millions of dollars in grants to Zionist establishments and simultaneously funding from similar entities as well. Now you have, right here you have Jill Bratt, who likes to go by Scout Bratt, publicly began representing herself as part of the JVP team around early 2016. But her work with Zionist-backed orgs date to late 2010. Scout's portfolio boasts plenty of work and volunteer and work experience with a slew of different organizations. Her work with Avoda specifically is interesting, where she took up 4 different job positions from 2010 to 2018. Avoda, a globally functioning training and organizing group, plays the Judaism card, claiming to be a left-of-center Jewish enterprise that promotes a vision of Jewish life rooted in justice. However, a quick look at Avoda's donor organization shows the enterprise's funding is largely influenced by Zionist foundations, some of which are Charles and Lynn Schusterman Family Foundation, Dorot Foundation. It operates in conjunction with the New Zionist Fund, Morning Star Foundation, Naomi and Nehemiah Cohen Foundation, which writes grants to the NIF and J Street. However, more fascinating than that is Scout Bratt's currently ongoing job of campaign organizer and finance and administrative assistant with the Center for Jewish Nonviolence, a performative two-state normalizing organization that assembles delegations of diaspora Jews, aka Zionist settlers, and look how they have that in quotes. Diaspora Jew is Zionist normalization, right? Using the term Jewish diaspora is Zionist normalization, quote-unquote diaspora Jews, right? To quote-unquote co-resist with Palestinians under occupation and ethnic displacement. Such organizations are nothing short of a sick ploy, playing into the toxic narrative that Zionism equates to Judaism, aiming to emphasize that Jews are allies to Palestinians, because hence sending Jews to quote-unquote co-resist with Palestinians being crushed under an occupation regime. However, through a realistic lens, these delegations not only pour their travel expenses into the Zionist entities' pockets, further funding the settler colonialism, apartheid, and occupation, but also in the long run achieve absolutely nothing. Aside from using displaced Palestinians as puppets and props in the media to sell sob stories to pull off the Jews are in the good guys narrative, these delegations are comprised of American and European citizens and funded by American tax dollars. The part where they feign helplessness in the face of Zionist military and settlers is poisonous and performative. It's been 5 years Scout's been working hard at organizing campaigns to usher even more American Jews into Occupy Palestine, and it's 5 years of continued ethnic displacement, murder, and brutalization of Palestinians. And then you got Ashley Bohr, and yet another shining member on JVP's board of directors, who also happens to be on the Center for Jewish Nonviolence team. And she was even on, and this is a direct quote, Ashley Borer said, "We bring Jews from around the world to support whatever it is that Palestinians need in order just to continue to exist." Oh, and this is more about Rachel Eisner. Later in 2010, Rachel Eisner attained the position of Northwest Regional Director at J Street and worked with the Zionist organization for more than 8 years. It goes without saying that J Street, yet another US-based nonprofit, strives towards advancing Zionist interests with the two-state solution advocacy and strengthening American Zionist relations, maintaining a steady flow of financial aid from the US to fund a genocide. And Rachel Eisner is a two-stater. There's a quote from her right here. And now you got this guy, Mitchell Plitnick. And we've documented a lot of his Zionist normalization. So Mitchell Plitnick, a former co-director at JVP. I don't even know why Mondo Weiss is run by Zionists. Adam Horowitz and Philip Weiss, they are Zionists. Here we go. Mitchell Plitnick, a former co-director of JVP, who majorly contributed to the organization's takeoff in its initial years. Mitchell has a Plitnick. Yeah, he is a Plitnick. Mitchell has a history and a current day track record of serving Zionists and planning normalizers in Palestinian communities. Aside from being the co-director at JVP, his past positions also list him as director of B'Tselem, which is the Zionist Center for Human Rights. He's also served as vice president at the Foundation for Middle East Peace. FMEP funds the new Zionist Fund, among a number of similarly normalizing and Zionist-infiltrated organizations, such as If Not Now, Just Vision, Association for Civil Rights and the Zionist Entity, Physicians for Human Rights, Zionist Entity. Yeah, and now he's being platformed by Mark Lamont Hill, who's a liberal Zionist and an Islamophobe, I also might add. He's being platformed by Mondo Weiss, which is run by Zionist Adam Horowitz and Zionist Philip Weiss, who are platformed by Black Liberation Media and liberal Zionist Jared Ball. So there's clearly a pattern of Zionist normalization with JVP at this point. Now you got Rebecca Vilkomerson, the former executive director. And Rebecca has been affiliated with JVP since 2001 and only recently called it quits with the organization in 2019 after her husband was exposed for directly working with the Zionist cybersecurity branch of the IOF, called Checkpoint Inc. During her 19-year employment period, she was the executive director for 10 of them. Her senior role probably emboldened her to take decisions such as collaborate with J Street under the facade of furthering the BDS movement. However, in 2017, when Jonathan Lebovitz, her husband, was exposed to be working as a solution architect for Checkpoint Software Technologies, a Zionist cybersecurity vendor established in occupied Palestine by Zionist military forces, her sense of invincibility dropped a couple notches, and in 2 years later, she called it quits for her with JVP. And she's still a member of New York JVP, by the way. Her husband's affiliation with the IOF shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone. Rebecca illegally took up residence in occupied Palestine during the years of 2006 to 2009 with her family. And she bragged about living in Jaffa and Sheikh Moanis. And it is of course under no debate that every home a non-Palestinian takes up residence in Palestine was formerly a Palestinian home whose owners were brutally killed, displaced, or chased out to make way for settlers. It is both disrespectful and impossible of Rebecca to claim to advocate for Palestinian rights with her fake activism work at JVP while simultaneously violating them. So yeah, that's a brief history of JVP. Right? So, and this is the thread. So, just wild timing. This is from 11 June 2024. If JVP chapters are any different from national, as people argue, they'll prioritize Palestinian liberation by adopting an anti-Zionism that is decolonial. At minimum, local chapters should stop their material and social support by halting donations and rebrand. There's Jamal Bowman, vilifying Palestinians. There's JVP shilling for Jamaal Bowman. We know these kind of critiques can make people really uncomfortable and feel that we are being divisive, or that this goes beyond our area of knowledge. But here is an important thing to remember. JVP is the single most well-funded Palestine, quote-unquote, Palestine-aligned U.S.-based organization. In 2023, according to its own report, expenses were $3.1 billion. In comparison to US CPR's 2022 report shows that annual total expense of $1.3 million. That is almost $2 million less. If not now, is nowhere close, about $500,000 of income in 2022. The point is that JVP, above all these other organizations, and of course there are others, has massive resources, millions of dollars to use in service of Palestinians for whom they claim to advocate. This is where we find the rub. Although they represent themselves as primarily centering Palestinians' interests and liberation, we see that consistently JVP and its NGO peers put political maneuvering over our well-being and certainly our liberation. While JVP shows up boasting a commitment to anti-Zionism in every other curated Instagram post, we have yet to see one material impact in Palestine. Even one principled stance with their political allies would be notable. JVP was one of the first quote-unquote Palestine-aligned organizations to condemn Palestinian resistance on October 7, and its stance has not shifted, just become more quiet as the tides of public opinion changed. Pinned posts suddenly got unpinned. This post in support of Bowman, whether a scheduled post that went out in error or a serious miscalculation made on the fly, is indicative of a much larger and systemic problem. JVP chapters and their principal participants need to make a choice or go the way of DSA, boycotted. These conversations are essential now, as thousands of folks are learning about Palestine and engaging in real ways. Don't let them down, worrying you will be seen as divisive for having clarity. Give them the dignity of truth and don't let them think that JVP is the best allies we can do. And again, here we go. And this is, remember that Nadine Kiswani tweet? So this is what JVP had to, or not JVP, Good Shepherd Collective had to say about it. These organizations articulate a version of Zionism by which the settler maintains control of political structures, land, and resources through a discourse of equal rights. Their demand for equal rights enshrines the rights of the settler, realized at the expense of Palestinians. So, and then let's continue with this. So, these organizations, so Nadine Kiswani says, I'm sorry, but if JVP, if not now and JFRED want more praise than Neturei Karta, which is also a Zionist settler organization, by the way, and want to be seen as truly progressive and anti-Zionist organizations, they need to start acting like it. That means actually embodying anti-Zionism, not just condemning resistance, but openly supporting it. And then so Good Shepherd Collective says these organizations articulate a version of Zionism by which the settler maintains control of the political structures, land, and resources through a discourse of equal rights. Their demand for equal rights enshrines the rights of the settler realized at the expense of Palestinians. And then this article demonstrates how French settlers try to deploy the rhetoric of equal rights to take control of the land from the Kanaks in New Caledonia. And there's a link to Black Agenda Report. These organizations express a solidarity that is marketable to their liberal base at the individual, institutional, and governmental level of funding. JVP, and if not now, are funded by the same groups that openly finance Zionist institutions like the NIF and money from the US government. And here you go. JVP is funded by the Foundation for Middle East Peace. JVP is funded by the US government. From Palestine, it's frustrating to watch other Palestinian formations organize with these groups and effectively sign off on their very limited versions of solidarity and so-called anti-Zionism. There's nothing strategic about aligning with these modes of Zionism. Again, that goes back to the JVP San Diego claiming to organize with the Palestinian youth movement. We've heard members of Palestinian Youth Movement and Students for Justice in Palestine that they organize with the local JVP and If Not Now chapters because they're good people. Okay, sure, but then ask them to stop franchising liberal Zionism. They can start their own group with a new name and not spread those brands of their politics. On another note, it's important to understand that these groups, If Not Now, JVP, JFREJ, allied resistance formations, not simply because of the potential legal repercussions, but because there is an agreement between them and liberal Palestinian personalities. Linda Sarsour, for example, Yusuf Munayir, Omar Badr, Noura Atakat, just to name a few. By refusing to support Palestinian resistance in all its forms, or openly condemning them as all of these groups have done, those in solidarity reinforce liberal control over the Palestinian narrative by choosing which Palestinians they will listen to and uplift. This is a mutually beneficial agreement in which these groups work in solidarity with their Palestinian partners, all of whom are hand-selected and don't represent the popular will, but rather respond to liberal donors and their vision of quote-unquote peace through the human rights paradigm. This conscious effort allows both groups to maintain their relevant status and the financial support of their donors while eating up undeserved public space as quote-unquote experts. It's not only these groups that do this, but their overinflated budgets certainly help keep them on posters and calling some of these shots. This has been detrimental in international solidarity organizing efforts. So that's a little bit of the history of JVP. What else? And then this kind of sums everything up, right? So something that the arrogance of colonizers prevents them from grasping is that the colonized do not misunderstand them. They do not fail to grasp their ideology and motivation. Colonized people generally do not understand colonizers. We also understand how colonizers... Let me read that again. Colonized people generally not only understand colonizers, we also understand how colonizers see us. This knowledge is essential for oppressed people to survive and navigate systems built to entrap, oppress, and dispossess us. It means that colonized people, better than colonizers, can often intuitively navigate colonial infrastructure. That is not a good thing, but it's an important thing. Dehumanizing colonized people means the average colonizer often misapprehends the colonized, assuming they are lesser in every way. This is part of why they cannot understand indigenous resistance and its successes. It also explains why colonizing fake allies, quote-unquote allies, responded to October 7 with racism, shock, and horror to find themselves alienated from the quote-unquote co-resistors. They do not understand and will not try to. They are not interested in decolonization, liberation, and anti-colonial analysis. As Western media comes to quote-unquote realize a good many things that Palestinians have been saying about the Zionist entity and its genocide, and foreign scholars make money quote-unquote analyzing resistance and the larger struggle of decolonization, keep this in mind. It's not us who misunderstands them. And understanding the colonized will not come through attempts to subdue, infiltrate, or control. Oppressed people will be understood through our liberation. That's powerful. What else do I want to read to you guys? Oh, this has to do with JVP. This is about Alyssa Wise and Rebecca Vilkomerson's new book. Very disappointing article by a generally excellent source of news. I don't know about that with Mondoweiss. They sure platform Zionists frequently. During a genocide, we don't need feel-good, meaningless interviews to serve as free marketing for empty chairs at expertise, particularly uplifting grifters. Thread on article below. Vilkomerson and Wise, Rebecca Vilkomerson and Alyssa Wise, announced this book presenting themselves as critics on quote-unquote anti-Zionist organizing and resistance months ago. Following wide criticism of them, their work, and the timing of this book, its release was delayed and the prophets promised that we are not numbers. The thing is that, as we've pointed out, no one writes a book to profit. Ask any author or academic. They write and publish the book to make a claim of some kind. In this case, to expertise and influence over the future of Palestinian solidarity organizing and its terms. For context, Vilkomerson served as the head of JVP for years. In this interview, she more or less acknowledges that JVP, over its existence and under her reign, was continuously behind on taking the most basic steps in solidarity with Palestinians at the expense of their allies. So JVP said, Vilkomerson said, we had a long-standing relationship with Adullah New York, and for a long time, JVP didn't endorse BDS. We endorsed BDS in 2015, but before then, we were still doing the boycott occupation campaign. We're doing these partnerships with Adullah New York, and they would ask us to endorse their cultural boycott and their broader boycott of the Zionist entity. However, because we had these guidelines that limited us to a boycott of the occupation, we always had to say no. They never got mad at us, and they didn't stop our relationship, which they should have stopped their relationship. They kept on working with us whenever they could, but that experience was very agitational in a good way. We were disappointing our partners, and we didn't want to disappoint our partners. We wanted to be in full partnership with them, and we wanted to be able to say yes to them. Vilkomerson stepped down from her role of the head of JVP around the time folks raised question about her own investment in the mechanisms of surveillance and elimination of Palestinians, as her husband worked for Checkpoint, a Zionist security company. This interview is bad for a lot of reasons, not only to mention that it's free press for self-proclaimed quote-unquote experts. Not once does the interviewer ask Vilkomerson's relationship to JVP. Today, for example, though she says herself she's still a member of JVP New York City. Wild. The author never asks her to define terms she uses repeatedly. Terms JVP also fails to define satisfactorily or in the context of Palestinian history, such as Zionism and anti-Zionism. Vilkomerson also admits something that might unnoticed. JVP only endorsed BDS after there were other options available for those who were not willing to accept the simple and moral stance. This isn't about being allies, it's about capturing resources and managing dissent. A number of other Jewish organizations emerged from between 2010 and 2020 that ranged from J Street to If Not Now. So JVP was taking more and more specific and sharp political positions from BDS to anti-Zionism, but they also weren't the only game in town. If people felt uncomfortable with those positions, they could find other places where they felt more at home. So, endorsing BDS does not equal becoming anti-Zionist. Not by the standards of historical Palestinian resistance, which exists today. Rather, by endorsing JVP was able to capture members that otherwise might have gone somewhere else, more aligned with their principles. We see here that it's not about Palestinians or solidarity with us. It's about making a home for Jewish people to feel comfortable and moral while not having to sacrifice their community. Our struggle is not an opportunity for people to prioritize people living in the heart of empire. Why doesn't Michael Aria ask who JVP's partners are? JVP doesn't respond to anti-Zionist critique or seem to organize with any Palestinian groups or individual organizers outside of Linda Sarsour and NGO organizers. Who do they answer to? Who's she referencing? Palestinians don't know. The interviewer also didn't ask about her response to October 7th or her belief in Palestinians' right to resistance. It's notable because on October 12th, JVP condemned Palestinian resistance and has left a condemnation up in the months following. Right? And we've covered that. In this post, JVP not only parrots Zionist propaganda, which a claim that we know is completely false. And they left the post up. So that post is still up there on their Instagram today. And I'm not on Instagram. So, by the way, many of the leading, one of the quote unquote leading Palestinian human rights groups they cite in the post above were extorted into making such declarations with the full knowledge that without condemning Palestinian resistance, their foreign funders would leave them penniless. So there's so much more to say, so much cringe at that drips with self-importance and stolen expertise. This is not solidarity, this is not love, and we demand better. It's disappointing to see a publisher we appreciate and to which our own members have contributed platforming someone like this. Mondoweiss, your work is much more important and better than this. So yeah, JVP is Zionist, so there you go. And I'm actually going to do a quick audit because JVP Seattle. So this is JVP Seattle. And again, they have a platform of and a pattern of Zionist normalization. They're only following JVP National. Now, who's following them? JVP Dallas Fort Worth. Just Fada, who has a Zionist flag on her profile. Elsa Marie. Kitsap Palestine Solidarity Commission. Why are Palestine solidarity activists from Kitsap, whether they be from Port Orchard, or Bremerton, or anywhere else on that side of Puget Sound, following JVP Seattle? That's kind of weird. Why is We Are Not Numbers following JVP Seattle? That's weird. That seems like a little bit of Zionist normalization. Aaron, who has the Star of David in his profile, JVP San Diego. Alyssa Krumman from JVP Vermont, JVP, and then Charles Keener. That's weird. That's weird. Now, who is Kitsap Palestine Solidarity Coalition following? Why are they following If Not Now? That's weird. If Not Now is Zionist. Indivisible Bainbridge Island, that's also weird. Indivisible is Zionist. Breakthrough News, again, Chinese propaganda, which is also Zionist. If Not Now is Zionist. Democracy Now is Zionist. Code Pink is Zionist, and they're also Chinese operatives, Chinese government operatives, and Dangists. JVP Seattle is Zionist. JVP is Zionist. The BNC has a pattern of Zionist normalization. That's going to be in my next video. Or in 2 videos, maybe. IMEU, Liberal Zionist. Middle East Eye, Zionist. Now, who are they reposting? And that's weird that they're promoting The Cradle, which has a pattern of Zionist normalization, Breakthrough News, which is Zionist, Mondoweiss, Zionist, ZDO, Zionist, Majority Report, Zionist, The Intercept is Zionist, and Democracy Now is Zionist. That's so. So yeah,